Diane Foster stepped into the abandoned warehouse at 2 a.m., her heart hammering as she saw three small figures huddled in the corner: 12-year-old twins Emma and Ethan, and their 8-year-old sister Sophia, all clutching kitchen knives and screaming at her to stay away. These weren't ordinary runaways. These were children who had watched their mother overdose 3 weeks ago, children who had been living off stolen food and rainwater, children who had already attempted to end their own lives twice. And tonight, as sirens wailed in the distance and social services closed in, they had one final plan that would either save them or destroy them forever. Before we dive in, make sure to subscribe, give this video a like, and tell us in the comments where in the world you're tuning in from. Now let's begin. The Foster children weren't just running from the system. They were running from a nightmare that had started 2 years earlier when their father, Detective James Foster, was killed in the line of duty. Their mother, Sarah, had spiraled into addiction, leaving the children to fend for themselves in a house that became a revolving door of dangerous strangers. When Sarah finally overdosed, the children discovered her body and made a pact. They would never be separated, never be placed in different homes, and never trust another adult again. They had already been failed by the system once when a foster family had returned them after 3 days, calling them too damaged to handle. Now, with Child Protective Services closing in and no relatives willing to take all three together, Emma had convinced her siblings that death was better than separation. They had already tried jumping from a bridge. Ethan had pulled back at the last second, saving them all. They had tried carbon monoxide poisoning in an abandoned car. A homeless man had found them and called paramedics. Tonight was their third and final attempt, and this time, Emma had ensured there would be no rescue. Diane Foster, no relation to the children despite the shared surname, was a former social worker who had quit the system 5 years earlier after watching too many children slip through the cracks. She now worked as a private child advocate, taking cases the state had given up on. She had been tracking the Foster children for 3 weeks, ever since their caseworker had unofficially reached out, admitting the system had failed them. Diane had one chance to reach these children before they carried out their plan. But she was walking into a situation where 3 traumatized children saw every adult as a threat and death as their only escape from a world that had shown them nothing but abandonment and pain. As Diane slowly approached the children in the warehouse, Emma, the self-appointed leader of the trio, held her knife higher and screamed, "We know why you're here. They sent you to split us up just like they split up every family. We're not going to different homes. We're staying together, even if it means we have to die together." But Diane didn't respond the way the children expected. Instead of trying to calm them down or promising things would be okay, she sat down on the dirty concrete floor 30 feet away and said something that made all 3 children freeze. "You're absolutely right. The system is going to separate you. They've already found homes for Emma and Sophia together, but Ethan has behavioral issues from witnessing your father's death, so he'll go to a specialized facility 3 states away. You'll never see each other again." The warehouse fell silent except for the sound of Sophia's quiet sobbing. Diane continued, "I'm not here to lie to you or make promises I can't keep. I'm here because I think there's a 4th option you haven't considered, one that lets you stay together, but it means trusting someone who failed 3 children just like you 5 years ago." Diane told them about Michael, David, and Lisa, 3 siblings she tried to help when she worked for the state. Like the Foster children, they had lost both parents and refused to be separated. Diane had fought for them, promising she would keep them together, but budget cuts and bureaucracy had torn them apart anyway. Michael had been placed with an abusive foster family and had run away at 14, living on the streets until he overdosed at 16. David had been sent to a group home where he was repeatedly assaulted by older kids, eventually taking his own life at 15. Lisa, the youngest, had been adopted by a wealthy family who treated her like a pet, giving her material things but no love. She had survived, but Diane had received a letter from her just last month describing her struggles with depression and inability to trust anyone. "I quit social work because I realized the system doesn't actually care about keeping families together. It cares about paperwork and statistics," Diane said, her voice breaking. "But I've spent the last 5 years building something different. A network of people who were failed by the system, just like you, who now help children that the state has given up on. We don't operate within the system. We operate around it. We find ways to keep siblings together, even when it means breaking rules." She pulled out her phone and showed them a video. 3 teenagers laughing around a kitchen table. These are the Rodriguez siblings. 2 years ago, they were exactly where you are now. The state wanted to separate them, so we helped them disappear. They live with a family in Canada now, together. The Carson twins were supposed to be split between 2 foster families in different states, so we connected them with a retired teacher in Oregon who takes in sibling groups. There are 43 children living free right now because we refuse to let them be torn apart. Emma's grip on the knife loosened slightly, but her voice remained hard. Why should we believe you? Every adult has lied to us. Diane nodded. You shouldn't believe me. In fact, I'm going to give you something no adult has ever given you. Complete control. She reached in her bag and pulled out an envelope. Inside this envelope are 3 documents. One is a letter explaining exactly how we would get you somewhere safe together. The truth, not lies or false hope. One is contact information for 5 families who have successfully helped sibling groups disappear and start new lives. And one is a detailed plan for how you could carry out what you're planning tonight, but with dignity and without pain. The children stared at her in shock. I'm going to leave this envelope here and walk away. You can read all 3 options, and then you decide. If you choose the 3rd option, no one will stop you, and no one will find you until it's too late for anyone to interfere. But if you choose the 1st option, call the number I've written on the outside of the envelope. You have until sunrise to decide. Diane walked out of the warehouse and sat in her car, watching the building through binoculars as hours passed. At 4:30 a.m., just as the first hint of dawn appeared on the horizon, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. We read everything. We want to try your way, but we have conditions. When Diane walked back into the warehouse, the 3 children were sitting together, the weapons set aside, but Emma's eyes were still filled with distrust. We'll come with you, but only if you can prove right now that you're not just another person who's going to abandon us. We want to see one of these families you talked about. We want to meet kids who are like us. And we want to promise in writing that if your plan doesn't work, you'll help us finish what we started here tonight, instead of letting us be separated. Diane made a phone call, and within 2 hours, a van pulled up to the warehouse. Out stepped Maria Santos, a woman in her 40s with graying hair and kind eyes, followed by 3 teenagers, 2 boys and a girl who looked remarkably similar. Maria, Diane said to the foster children, was a social worker like me 15 years ago, when the state tried to separate her from her 3 kids after her husband died in a car accident. She learned how broken the system really was. The teenagers with her are Jake, Luis, and Carmen Rodriguez, the ones I showed you in the video. Jake, the oldest at 17, sat down across from Emma and said, 2 years ago, I was holding a gun to my head because I couldn't handle the thought of never seeing my brother and sister again. Luis had already tried to hang himself, and Carmen was cutting herself every night. We were exactly where you are right now. Luis, 15, rolled up his sleeves to show faded scars. The state told us we were too traumatized to be together, that we needed different kinds of help. What they didn't understand is that losing each other would have been worse than losing our parents. Carmen, 13, looked directly at Sophia. I was your age when our parents died. I thought I was too young for anyone to listen to me, but Maria and Diane taught me that being young doesn't mean you don't know what you need. Maria explained how their underground network operated. We don't kidnap children or break custody laws. We work within legal gray areas, connecting children with distant relatives who can petition for custody, finding loopholes in interstate regulations, and when necessary, helping families relocate to countries with different adoption laws. The Rodriguez kids now live with my sister's family in Toronto. They attend school, they have counseling when they need it, but most importantly, they wake up every morning in the same house. She handed Emma a thick folder. This contains documentation for 12 families in 6 different countries who specialize in taking in sibling groups that the U.S. system has failed. Each family has been vetted. Each has successfully raised children who came from situations like yours. But I want you to understand something. This isn't witness protection or hiding. Once you're placed, you can still contact people from your old life. You can still visit your father's grave. You can still be who you are. We're not asking you to disappear forever. We're asking you to live. Emma spent an hour reading through the documentation while Ethan and Sophia stayed close to her side. Finally, she looked up at Diane. There's a family here in Montana who takes in sibling groups. The Patterson family. They've raised 11 children, including 2 sets of triplets and 1 group of 4 siblings whose parents died in Afghanistan. But it says here they require a 6-month trial period where the kids live in a transition house first, and that they don't accept children who have had suicidal ideation. Diane nodded. That's correct. But there's something not written in those files. Margaret Patterson's own story. Margaret, would you like to tell them? From the shadows of the warehouse emerged a woman in her 60s with silver hair and deeply lined hands. Margaret Patterson had been waiting outside in case the children decided they wanted to meet her, but she hadn't wanted to overwhelm them. 40 years ago, Margaret said, sitting down on the concrete floor with the children, I was a teenager who watched my 4 younger siblings get split up after our parents died in a house fire. I was sent to one home, my brothers went to another, and my 2 little sisters went to a 3rd family 3 states away. I never saw them again. Her voice was steady, but tears ran down her cheeks. I spent 20 years searching for them. I found my youngest sister when she was 32. She had spent her entire adult life struggling with abandonment issues and drug addiction because she never understood why her big sister had abandoned her. She died of an overdose 6 months after we reconnected. I never found my brothers or my other sister. Margaret explained that she had built her ranch specifically to house sibling groups because she understood that the bond between siblings who have survived trauma together is often stronger than any other relationship they will ever have. The 6-month trial period isn't about testing whether you're good enough for us. It's about giving you time to heal enough to trust that we're not going anywhere. And the policy about suicidal ideation isn't about rejection. It's about making sure we have the right support systems in place. Every child who has come to our ranch has been where you are tonight. That's exactly why we exist. She pulled out her own phone and showed them photos. Children of all ages working on a ranch, riding horses, sitting around a massive dinner table, playing in snow, laughing by a lake. This isn't a group home or an institution. It's a working ranch where kids learn to raise animals, grow food, and most importantly, learn that family doesn't end when parents die. It just changes shape. The Rodriguez kids spent 3 months with us before moving to Canada. They still call every week, and they visit every summer. Margaret looked directly at Emma. I can see in your eyes the same thing I've seen in 47 other children who have come to us. You've decided that you're responsible for keeping your family together, even if it kills you. I'm here to tell you that responsibility doesn't have to be a death sentence. It could be a life sentence, if you're willing to let other people help you carry the weight. As the sun rose fully over the warehouse, Emma stood up and walked to the far corner where the 3 knives lay on the ground. Ethan and Sophia watched in terror, thinking she was about to pick them up and end their lives as planned. Instead, Emma picked up each knife and threw them as hard as she could toward the opposite wall, where they clattered to the ground harmlessly. We've been carrying these everywhere for 3 weeks, she said, her voice shaking. They were supposed to make us feel safe, like we had control. But I just realized something. The only thing they've done is make us feel more scared. She turned to face everyone. For the first time in 2 years, people are talking to us like we're smart enough to make our own decisions, not just victims who need to be saved or problems that need to be managed. But just as it seemed the children had chosen life, police sirens began wailing outside the warehouse. Through the broken windows, they could see 3 squad cars and a social services van pulling up. Someone must have seen the cars and called in a kidnapping report, Diane said, her face pale. If the police take you into custody now, you'll be separated immediately and placed in emergency foster care in different counties while they investigate. Emma, you and Sophia might end up together, but Ethan will definitely be placed alone because of his PTSD episodes. Emma's face went hard again, and she started walking toward where the knives had fallen. Then we go back to the original plan. At least if we die together, we'll be together. But Ethan, who had barely spoken since they had arrived at the warehouse, suddenly stepped in front of his sister. No, Emma. I've been listening to everything, and I understand something now. You've been trying to save Sophia and me for 2 years, but you've been trying to save us by dying. What if there's a way to save us by living? He turned to Margaret. You said every kid who comes to your ranch has been where we are. Does that mean they all wanted to die too? Margaret nodded. Yes, sweetie. And some of them tried. We had one boy who tried to drown himself in our pond 3 days after he arrived. A girl who set fire to her room thinking she could die in the flames. Another child who tried to jump from the barn loft. But you know what happened to all of them? They lived. And more importantly, they lived together with their siblings. She looked at Emma. The police are here because the system thinks we've kidnapped you. But there's still a way to choose life and stay together. If you're willing to trust one more time, I can make a phone call that will change everything. Margaret pulled out a satellite phone and dialed a number. Judge Reynolds, it's Margaret Patterson. I'm with the 3 foster children right now, and I'm invoking Emergency Custody Protocol 7 under the Sibling Preservation Act of 2019. She paused, listening. Yes, sir, I understand the legal ramifications. I'm willing to take full responsibility. She handed the phone to Emma. This is Judge Reynolds. He helped write the law that allows children and sibling groups to petition for emergency placement together when separation would cause imminent psychological harm. He wants to ask you some questions. Emma took the phone with shaking hands. Judge Reynolds' voice was gentle but serious. Emma, I understand you and your siblings have been through tremendous trauma, and you're afraid of being separated. I need you to tell me, in your own words, what you think will happen to you and your siblings if you're placed in separate homes. Emma's voice was barely above a whisper. Ethan will think we abandoned him like everyone else has, and he'll hurt himself. Sophia will stop eating like she did after Dad died, and she'll waste away. And I'll spend every day wondering if they're okay, and it will kill me slowly until I can't take it anymore. The judge asked several more questions, and then said, Emma, I'm going to make a ruling right now that grants Margaret Patterson emergency custody of all 3 of you for 6 months, with the requirement that you receive trauma counseling and that your case be reviewed monthly. The police outside have been instructed to escort you to the Patterson Ranch, not to separate facilities. But I need you to understand, this is your choice. Are you choosing to live together? Emma looked at Ethan and Sophia, and for the first time in months, she smiled. We're choosing to live together. 6 months later, Emma Foster stood in a courtroom wearing a blue dress that Margaret had helped her pick out, flanked by Ethan in a suit that was slightly too big and Sophia in a yellow dress with sunflowers on it. Judge Reynolds sat behind his bench, looking at a thick file of reports from counselors, teachers, and Margaret herself. In all my years on the bench, he said, I have never seen a more dramatic transformation in children who were considered impossible to help. Emma, your grades have gone from failing to honor roll. Ethan, your PTSD episodes have decreased from daily to weekly, and your counselor says you're beginning to process your father's death in healthy ways. Sophia, you've gained 12 pounds, you're sleeping through the night, and your teacher says you're one of the most helpful children in her class. But the judge continued, more importantly, all 3 of you have learned something that many adults never learn. That healing doesn't mean forgetting your parents or pretending your trauma didn't happen. It means building new relationships without destroying the memory of what came before. He looked at Margaret, who was sitting in the front row with tears in her eyes. Margaret Patterson, you have provided these children with something they had never experienced. Unconditional stability. They have acted out. They have tested you. They have broken your property and challenged your authority. And through it all, you have never once threatened to send them away or separate them. The judge's final ruling was that Margaret would become the permanent guardian of all 3 foster children, with the option for formal adoption when they turned 18 if they chose. But as they left the courthouse, Emma stopped on the steps and turned to Diane, who had attended every court hearing and visited the ranch twice a month for the entire 6 months. I need to ask you something, and I want an honest answer. That night in the warehouse, when you gave us the envelope with 3 options, did you really include instructions on how to kill ourselves? Or was that a lie to get us to trust you? Diane was quiet for a long moment, then reached into her purse and pulled out a folded piece of paper. She handed it to Emma, who opened it and read it silently. After several minutes, Emma's eyes filled with tears, and she handed the paper to Ethan and Sophia to read. The paper contained detailed, peaceful methods that would have allowed the 3 children to die together without pain, along with instructions on how to write letters that would ensure no one blamed themselves for their deaths. At the bottom, in Diane's handwriting, were the words, I trust you to choose life, but if you choose death, you deserve dignity and peace. You really would have helped us die if we had chosen that, Emma said, her voice full of wonder. What? Diane knelt down to look Emma in the eyes. Because for the first time in your lives, someone was giving you a real choice. Not a choice between what adults wanted and what adults thought was best for you, but a choice between life and death that was entirely yours to make. I believe that if you felt truly in control of your fate, you would choose to live. And you did. Emma hugged Diane tightly, and as they stood on the courthouse steps in the afternoon sunshine, surrounded by the people who had fought to keep them together, she realized something profound. She was no longer the scared 12-year-old who had to protect everyone. She was still Emma Foster, still the big sister, still carrying the memory of her parents. But now she was also a daughter to Margaret, a student who was loved by her teachers, and a young woman who had learned that choosing life was the bravest thing she had ever done. Today, 2 years later, Emma Foster is 14 and serves as a peer counselor for other sibling groups who are facing separation. Ethan, now 12, raises horses on Margaret's ranch and has written a children's book about grief that has been distributed to social service agencies across the country. Sophia, 10, started a letter-writing program connecting children in foster care with kids who have been successfully placed with their siblings. Margaret Patterson has expanded her ranch to accommodate 12 sibling groups at a time, and Diane Foster has helped keep 37 families together using the network they built. The Foster children learned that family isn't just about sharing blood or even sharing parents. It's about choosing every day to love someone enough to stay with them through the worst parts of life. Their story reminds us that sometimes the bravest thing we can do is not to save someone, but to trust them to save themselves when we give them real choices and unconditional support. If this story touched your heart and made you believe that love can heal even the deepest wounds, please like this video and subscribe for more powerful stories about families who refuse to give up on each other. Share your thoughts in the comments about how we can better support siblings in the foster care system. And remember, sometimes the difference between choosing life and choosing death is simply having someone who trusts you to make the right choice when it truly matters. See you in the next video.